Welcome back to Practically Political. I'm Dave Spencer. It's great to have you.
And I'm Carrie Sheffield. Good to have you. And Dave, let's get to it. All right, Dave. So President Biden recently said that he's going to add even more drilling restrictions in Alaska. And in my view, and this is the numbers speaking, it's not even just my view, it's the numbers. This benefits OPEC and Russia and our foreign adversaries who are going to enrich themselves on even more oil while constraining our own oil resources and hurting American families. So don't you think that's counterproductive when we are trying to fund this war against Russia? And then there's also the fact that our NATO allies are not paying their fair share for defense spending. So my question to you is, given those factors and other factors as well, do you support the continued unrestrained, unrestricted support of Ukraine, or do you think we should have some more actual demands and requirements? Because you have these senators on Capitol Hill saying we're not going to do a rubber stamp on this. What's your take on this?
Boy, well, there's a whole bunch of questions in there. So let me just address the energy one first. I said before on this show, and I've said to anyone who will listen, one of the great mysteries to me is that we seem to have one party that's against fossil fuels and one party that's against alternative fuels. We should go full speed ahead on both. The bottom line is for the next 15 or 20 years, we're going to be getting at least 80% of our energy from fossil fuels. And the AOCs and the environmentalists of the world can curse me out, but it's a fact. Secondly, I don't understand why there's been inconsistency from the Biden administration. They were against it, then they're for it. Now they seem to be putting restrictions on. We need a consistent energy policy. And frankly, we need to increase our relations, improve our relations with Saudi Arabia. Whatever we think of MBS, he's going to be there for 40 years. He's wildly popular. And if we had a better relationship with Saudi Arabia, they wouldn't be cutting back production. They would be increasing it. So let me just say that. That's now on to your question with Ukraine. I think that, yes, the money needs to be accounted for. But the thing we have to keep in mind is the cost of failing in Ukraine are far higher than the cost of succeeding. Because if Putin is able to take Ukraine, and again, even if he were able to, say, take over Kyiv, the problem is that there's such a thirst for democracy in the country that the citizens would never live under that rule. And so there'd be constant local skirmishes and civil wars and all kinds of stuff going on. So it wouldn't work. But having said that, if Putin can succeed in Ukraine, Poland, or the Baltics, or some NATO country is going to be next, and then we really are talking about a lot of money. So I think we should encourage Ukraine to continue doing. We should make sure that people like Elon Musk don't cut off Starlink. And but yes, we need to keep putting money in and supporting them because the cost of failure is far greater. What say you?
Well, I mean, what about NATO? Because you have, I checked, and I believe it's only 11 out of 31 countries who are projected this year to meet their NATO 2% GDP spend. We are one of them. Canada is not, France is not, Italy is not, very large countries as well as some smaller countries. I mean, don't you think that is kind of the bare minimum that the people who's in the backyard is Ukraine should be doing more? I mean, shouldn't they be taking more responsibility? I guess that's a big question that I have. And then I also recently heard a friend of mine is a reporter for New York Post, and he had a scoop about how there was a bunch of Wall Street American bankers and billionaires meeting with the Ukrainian president to talk about how to rebuild Ukraine, and that, to the Republican conservative base or just anybody who cares about America, and heck, even the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, why don't they put their money and resources behind stopping this flow of illegal immigration and controlling our own border instead of focusing so much overseas? I totally agree. And we've talked about this before too. I'm very supportive of the cause for the people of Ukraine. I very much am. But I think it's disappointing how the offensive hasn't gone they're brave and incredible people. But I do think that we have to ask ourselves, why aren't our allies doing more? And are we being used and exploited? And are the American people and the American taxpayers being exploited by not doing enough for our own self at home?
Well, A couple of things. First of all, there are countries, yes, countries are paying more. It's taking time to ramp up, but look what Japan is spending on uh, their defense. They're spending a lot more than what Germany has upped their ante a lot. And you also have to remember, Kerry, there are a lot of ways that don't involve just direct money. Look at all the refugees that Poland's taken in. I mean, that's been a huge expense for them. So I think a lot of these countries are pulling their weight. But I would just say, if you want it, the best thing for Ukraine is to make sure that Donald Trump is not elected president, because he has said point blank that, he would say that he would end the war in 24 hours, which is absurd. But he's also said, "Oh, I would just give Putin this territory." He said blatantly before that he doesn't like NATO. He was going to disband NATO. So put yourself in Putin's shoes, right? This is a waiting game. His strategy is that the attention span of the West is limited, and that interest is going to decline, which is true, and that's true for almost any cause like this. But even more so, if only Donald Trump can become president again, then I'll be fine, because he's never criticized me, and he's my puppet. So that is the best way we can assure the success of Ukraine, is to keep Donald Trump out of the White House.
We're going to disagree on that. I believe.
So let's go ahead. I'll give you the last word.
I believe the Ukrainian invasion would not have occurred if Donald Trump was still president. I do believe that for numerous reasons. One is the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan. That projected incredible weakness, incredible negligence, $80 billion of equipment lost in Afghanistan. How about we resurrect some of that $80 billion to give that to Ukraine? So you know who that telegraphed? I'm a weak country and I'm a weak leader. Putin saw that. And Donald Trump didn't allow that to happen. He could have pulled out Ukraine at any point. He wanted to, but he didn't, because he knew the conditions had not been met. So Joe Biden's weakness in Afghanistan incentivized him. And then there's also the disastrous energy policy on Nord Stream 2 pipeline domestically. Again, enriching and enlarging the pockets of Russia. Biden has done some good on the sanctions. I give him that credit. See, Dave, I'm giving credit. But to me, it's too little too late, and it's reactionary instead of proactive. And actually, as you said, acknowledging the reality of where the petro economy is today, not where some pipe dream where you want it to be in 80 years. We have to play with the map today. And I believe if Donald Trump had been president, this never would have happened.
First of all, you talk to any major energy company and they'll tell you it's going to be between 2040 and 2050 when they'll be able to go all alternatives. They want to do it. The market is driving it there, so that it's not going to be 80 years. I'd say, again, I think we're 15 to 20 years away. I think that's reasonable, maybe 25 max. But as far as, as you know, I'm not going to defend the president's withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think it was very poorly handled. We should have kept some troops in the Bagram Air Base, if you just look at the strategic value of it. So we agree on that. But where we strongly disagree is that the reason Putin didn't invade Ukraine when Trump was president was because he didn't have to, because Trump was on his way to disbanding NATO. So that's Putin's goal. So, Putin's puppet was doing his work for him. And as far as Putin's plans go, you have to remember that he's always thinking, I want to reunite the Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union was the worst thing that ever happened. So he's thinking it's going to be Ukraine first, then the Baltics. And lest we not forget, Donald Trump started negotiating the surrender by letting 5,000 of the most heinous criminals out of jail. And so again, this is something that Trump started. It's like the border crisis. Trump started it and Biden made it worse.